In the main event of UFC 284, your number one pound-for-pound fighter, Alexander Volkanovski, your featherweight champion, jumps up a weight class to lightweight to take on the number two ranked pound-for-pound fighter in Islam Makhachev, newly minted lightweight champ as of UFC 280, when he picked up a knock-him-down, drag-him-out submission win over Charles Oliveira to capture the belt. An amazing fight. As always, one half your host and duo, Craig Allen, Twitter and Instagram, at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, as always, respective socials, Raptors fan Matt Allen FNP. And when we look at this matchup coming up this weekend, Volkanovski, I mean, the win streak is 22 fights in a row.
It's pretty impressive.
He's 25-1. In the UFC, he's had 12 fights. He has had Fight of the Nights against Mendes and Ortega, performance bonus against the Korean Zombie. And in these title fights, he's had 4 straight big-time wins where he's been able to just hang on to that belt. You go back, and he's able to beat Holloway. He beats Ortega, beats Korean Zombie, and then Holloway again. So the trilogy is kind of lumped in there. And for Volkanovski, we've just continued to see a refinement of these skills that were already very good. I mean, very good boxing, very good Greco-Roman wrestling base. And that's the thing. I heard somebody mention it recently. Wow, Makhachev, his wrestling is so good. It's what got him to the dance. It's his best skill. And Volkanovski, he's an Australian Greco-Roman champ. And then I dug into it. He was a Greco-Roman champ when he was 12 years old in 2001. That doesn't mean a lot. His wrestling's good in MMA.
Very.
But that one accolade doesn't really mean a whole lot. Now, when you look at it for Volkanovski, Matt, like, people are also going to point to the fact that Chad Mendes took him down 3 times. Chad Mendes won 3 of 4 takedown attempts in that fight and held him down for 45 seconds.
And also had to work so hard for those takedown attempts that he was completely exhausted by like minute 2 of the second round. This is my whole problem when we talk about, oh, this guy won this round. Like, he looked really good to start out and then faded. Like, you can just waste all your energy in the first round and win it. That's cool. Like, basketball teams can outscore the other team in the first quarter, in the second quarter, even in the fourth quarter. If they don't do it for all of them, though, it doesn't really matter. And for Volkanovski, he was able to weather that storm from Chad Mendes and weaponize his pace in that fight more than anything. And that was a really impressive attribute to see from Volkanovski because he was largely untested against the highest levels of competition up until that point. I believe his best win going into that was the Darren Elkins win. And that was a great fight, don't get me wrong. He was very impressive. But even Elkins landed a couple body kicks in that fight. Like, Elkins made a good account of himself, even though he got dropped like 7 times. I can't believe I'm defending Darren Elkins in the Volkanovski fight. But my whole point is, Volkanovski before that Chad Mendes fight was an exciting prospect, and after that Mendes fight was a legit, like, title challenger, basically. But we talked about this a little bit off camera, and I'm going to make a basketball comp. I'm going to talk about Bellator and the NBA. Volkanovski, to me, is a lot like Chris Paul. Chris Paul can outthink anybody who's his size. Like, he's that smart about the game, the X's and O's. He's going to figure out what your weakness is, and then make it just the forefront of your game. Volkanovski can do that. The problem is with a guy like Chris Paul, it's not just a point guard on point guard league. The other team's going to put a way bigger guy on you who's going to be more athletic. And that's what I worry about with Volkanovski in this. Like, we talk about the pound for pound list now. He's pound for pound number 1. Makhachev's number 2. Oddly enough, like, even if Volkanovski loses this fight, he's still probably pound for pound number 1, because he's still better at featherweight. Like, I know that's a weird list and a weird discussion to bring up, but I just think for Volkanovski, it's great that he's trying to be great right now, but I look at this a lot like Rory McDonald trying to fight Gegard Mousasi. It's a very good fighter fighting a very good fighter. The difference is, one of the very good fighters just so happens to have a big size advantage over the other one.
And for Makhachev, the conversation the entire time he's been in the UFC is, well, just exactly who he's beaten. And if you go down through it, you make the list, he's won a myriad of fights in a row since losing to Adriano Martins. His only loss back in 2015. He beats Chris Wade, Nick Lentz, Kleydson Tebow, Cajun Johnson, Armin Tsarukyan in a fight of the night, Davi Hamos, Drew Dober, Thiago Moises, Dan Hooker, Bobby Green, and Charles Oliveira. And the biggest problem for Islam Makhachev, kind of leading into 2019, didn't fight in 2020. And then 2021, he really did pick it up. And he got the win over Dober, Moises, Hooker, and then in 2022, Bobby Green and Charles Oliveira. And obviously, there's a big skill gap between a lot of those guys. To go from Bobby Green to Charles Oliveira, now originally it was supposed to be Bobby Green, and that was on short notice, but you catch my drift. He finally was able to go out there, gets a performance bonus, the second round submission, drops him with kind of a straight shot as Oliveira's like kind of back, like his head's tilted back a little bit, and then just dog on a bone, he's down dirty, and he gets a submission win. So a great win for Makhachev there, but I'm really eager to see what we get out of him in a matchup like this, because let's break down their skills. Strike for strike. Who's the better striker?
Volkanovski, it's not even close.
Volkanovski, and it's not even close. Who has better footwork between these two guys?
Volkanovski, it's not even close.
Exactly. Who has better cardio between these two guys?
I would say Volkanovski. But we haven't really seen it out of Islam, and that's the big thing that's the big question mark that I do have in this fight. What if Volkanovski can make Islam scramble a lot? Because Arman Tsarukyan was able to do that in their matchup and avoid some of the prolonged periods of him just having his back on the mat where Islam could progress. And I think Volkanovski can have some success doing that. But this is what I go back to. Did Volkanovski ever have trouble making 145? Is he a big fighter in that division? No. He's smaller than most guys in his own division. Has Islam had trouble making 155 in the past? Yeah, it's like been a huge conversation throughout his career. I just keep on going back to, you have a guy who's like a borderline welterweight, that's how big he is, fighting a featherweight, and I just don't know what Volkanovski can do to get over the hump of the physicality of Makhachev.
Volkanovski is one of those like cross-training athletes, rugby over to MMA. Like, I thought Jared Hayne, coming from rugby over to the NFL, I thought, man, San Francisco 49ers are wearing the black jerseys, like, Jared Hayne's my guy. And then it didn't work out. But with Volkanovski, definitely has worked out. So when I look at this matchup, I go along those lines of striking, footwork, Volkanovski, wrestling, like just wrestling. Just a blanket term. Obviously, Islam Makhachev, the scrambles, it could be fun if we get there. But with Volkanovski, they're going to show you thick boy rugby Volkanovski, like 210, where he's just like, he's a big fella. He's a big, short fella.
How many farmer's wraps at Tim Hortons could that man devour?
Man, farmer's wraps. You get that little Chipotle sauce on there. About 6 in the morning, I bet. But when you look at a matchup like this, Matt, to me, it is tricky when it comes to grappling of Makhachev if we do get there. Now, the cold cock that Martins had really early on in their fight, like, kind of caught Makhachev, and he was able to just land that shot and just like a sack of bricks. Volkanovski's not one of those strikers, though. Like, Volkanovski's one of those guys that death by 1,000 cuts, he continues the wave, and it's really hard to go against it. But Makhachev in the matchup, about a minus 400 favorite in this one. I said before, like, we do this basically to break the fourth wall. Write my notes, and then right before we film the video, I just write down the odds really quickly. And I think I let out like a wow. Like, I can't believe that. But Makhachev is a big favorite in this matchup against a fellow pound-for-pound great, actually the number 1 pound-for-pound guy in Volkanovski, who hasn't lost a fight since 2013. So it's been about 10 years.
At welterweight, too.
Yeah, and the other thing for Volkanovski, to say that he is a featherweight, and obviously, I completely agree with you. He has lightweight experience. His UFC debut was at lightweight, and his fight against Smoke and Shane Young, who's also on this card, because it was short notice, it was at 150 pounds. So Volkanovski does actually have lightweight experience in the UFC, and it was a giant win. But if I look at this one, Makhachev, heavily favored to win the matchup. We throw it on over to you in the YouTube community tab, and you guys have voted here so far this morning. 61% going with Makhachev, so listen, slight there. The Wiseman, I would love to see the fight against the real GOATs. Jake Paul versus O'Malley. Just completely out of left field there. Simpson, I don't know how, but Volk. Tom Wiz is going with Makhachev, and we'll go with Chuz, saying Islam second round sub, and maybe Joe. Volk is way too small for Islam. Matt, when I look at this matchup, Volkanovski has beaten Jose Aldo. He's beaten Max Holloway 3 times. Probably a Hall of Famer.
Striker.
I bet you going into this fight, I bet you the UFC markets it and says, hey, this is our featherweight GOAT. They're going to completely erase Jose Aldo, just like they started to do with Kamaru Usman and just erase GSP a little bit. So
I think most people think Aldo's the GOAT, though, still.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a marketing push. So, but when we look at this matchup, Matt, we talk all about the skills of Volkanovski, talk all about the skills of Makhachev. Do you go with the big favorite in the matchup?
Yeah, the problem is, we've said this so many times, is X-Fighter a better striker than Islam Makhachev? Yeah, most of them are. It's
Drew Dober is.
The aggressiveness with the threat of his takedowns is so much that it's really hard to strike with your butt pushed way back and your shoulders forward. And that's the position every one of these fighters finds himself in. Think about Dustin Poirier, Khabib. Like, Khabib's a really good striker. Near the end of his career, he got better at it, of course. But, like, Poirier's as good of a pure boxer as we've had in the UFC. He couldn't really throw punches, though, because he was so worried about the forward movement and the threat of the takedown.
Now, Volkanovski has Joe Lopez in his corner, and he always has. Makhachev not going to have Khabib in his corner? That could play a difference.
That still doesn't get rid of the lifetime of wrestling the man's had throughout his whole entire, like, life. That's the thing. Like, Islam, it's not like this guy got started when he was 17 because he didn't make a college football team or something. Like, Islam's been getting ready for this for decades, and it will be a great fight. Like, I do think Volkanovski's going to offer up the best potential for a really good fight in this division. When the going gets tough, I think Volkanovski is more than proved at this point. Like, he digs down as deep as a human possibly can. He's got out of insane submissions from Brian Ortega, who is one of the best grapplers in the UFC. I just think Islam, with his physicality advantage and with his wrestling, is going to be a really difficult mountain for Volkanovski to climb.
I can't wait for this fight. I do have Islam Makhachev in the matchup. Somebody's going to get lucky win number 13 in their UFC careers. And for somebody, they're going to pick up their first, or rather, well, their second loss as a pro. But it should be a great fight. And this is one of those cards, Matt, like if we do look at it overall, again, 9 fighters out of Australia. You've got Justin Tafa out of New Zealand, but fights out of Australia. Tyson Pedro, the Australian, training out of New Zealand. And the lone New Zealander that is on this card, he gets to feel a little bit like an anomaly here. We have a guy in Shane Young. So a really, really interesting card that we do have coming up this weekend. Matt, when you do look at it, what's one of those fights that's flying under the radar that you're really excited about?
I think Maddelena versus Randy Brown's going to be a really fun fight. Again, for Randy Brown, it's unfortunate that this is what his win streak is kind of led to, because it's a really big opportunity for Maddelena. I know I've been really excited about his rise through the UFC up until this point, but this is by far his most difficult matchup, and it's not even really that close. So I think the fight between Brown and Maddelena might fly under the radar for some, but that's a really fun fight at 170.
A giant skill check there, and then a skill check on the prelims between Jack Jenkins and Don Shainis. And listen, Jenkins, does he decide to go really, really quick? Because you know that, oh, it's out of my hands. I'm shameless. Don Shainis, he's a guy that burns really hot at the start. So can't wait for that matchup. Make sure you check out Question Mark Kicks. It's not going to be 2 hours before the prelims. It's probably going to be Saturday morning because I fly out later on in the afternoon. A big time fight card with UFC 284. Thanks so much for the likes, the subscriptions. Things went wild with UFC Fight Night, Lewis versus Spivak that way. So thank you so much for the support. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.